Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sterling Live. This is actually a special episode of Sterling Live. We already came to you live yesterday, but I'm thrilled to be back here today with our two guests. So my name is Caitlin Brower. I am Sterling's social media manager. And again, Sterling Live, we do it weekly. We try to come at you at 1 p.m. Eastern every Tuesday on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. But today we're here on a Wednesday. We are here on St. Patrick's Day at 11 a.m. So I'm thrilled to be here today with Taylor Liggett, the general manager of Sterling Identity, and also Blake Hall, the founder and CEO of ID.me. So today we will be discussing our partnership, so Sterling and ID.me. So beyond excited, this is going to be great. So before we get into introductions of both Blake and Taylor, I would like to let our audience know that if you have questions for these two at any time, you can go ahead and put them in the comment section across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So any questions for these two, please submit them and I will get them over to them during the show. So let's move into introductions. They're going to be a little bit more formal than our previous episodes because Blake and Taylor, you guys have amazing backgrounds, amazing stories, and I know our audience needs to hear them. So Taylor, we're going to start with you. So can you introduce yourself and just let our audience know what drew you into the identity space and, you know, the path moving forward and where you are now and things like that?
Yeah, sure. Caitlin, I will tell you, I appreciate you letting me go first before Mr. Cool Kid over here gets to tell his origin story. So
I did that on purpose. No.
So I'll start my journey into the world of identity. I would say started in 2008. I joined ADP, and I think most people know ADP, global, payroll behemoth, HCM leader, but they also run a background screening division that's relatively sizable. And I spent about 8 years with ADP, really getting to know background screening, employment, identity, hiring, et cetera. I ran their account management group and had a great window into what really worked well in this space and what didn't. And long story short, over the course of this, I became very, very focused on identity and biometrics and really just what were some missing gaps within this space. And in 2016, I ended up joining a company by the name of SureID. And I joined them because they were working on some really revolutionary things within the space of trying to get to kind of a ubiquitous digital identity and tying identity and screening services and putting an individual more in control of sort of what they're doing. And then also very focused within biometrics. And long story short, late 2017, Sterling acquired SureID, and I came and joined Sterling to help lead that division. And since I've been at Sterling, we have really doubled down and as a whole organization leaned into the importance of identity, the current sort of gaps that exist, and where we see everything heading. And that's ultimately led to meet Blake and others. So that's a little bit about me.
Led you to this exact day on March 17th on this episode. But yes, thank you so much. So Blake, can you go ahead and same thing, introduce yourself to our audience, what led you to the identity space, the path moving forward, things like that.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Caitlin. And as Taylor alluded, my background's a little bit less traditional. I was an Army Ranger and led a recon platoon in Iraq in 2006, 2007. Couple weeks before we went into combat in Mosul, the three-letter intelligence agencies came in and said, you're not going to be doing reconnaissance. You're going to be running kill capture missions against high-value targets. So I spent the next 15 months running down mostly Al-Qaeda vehicle bomb networks, also some of the Quds proxies like the Iranian special forces that were operating over there, and really fell in love with identity using signal intelligence, so telecom data, SIM swaps, phone ports, device changes to take down vehicle bomb networks that in some cases were killing more than 1,000 civilians a month. So that was my background. I went to Harvard Business School after that and was just trying to figure out what to do with my life. It's pretty jarring to go from a 15-month combat tour across Iraq to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Still like 27, 28 years old. And ultimately realized that digital identity was a huge problem for legitimate people who have the exact opposite pattern of life of terrorists. You don't change your devices and SIM cards and things like that. And you can actually use that tenure in a really powerful way to prove who you are. So in 2012, because I started the company in 2010, NIST, which is part of the Department of Commerce, said, why do Americans have to create a new login and re-verify who they are at every single government agency they visit?
Right.
We want a model where we can verify you once, and then you just have single sign-on across the government, instead of us paying a credit bureau, 5 or 6 times for the same person, and you having 5 or 6 passwords. And that really resonated with me, and that's kind of what led to where we're at today. We have 38 million users. We sign up 1 million Americans every 13 days. And with this partnership with Sterling, we can do some really revolutionary things in the workforce and employment space that I think is going to change a lot of people's lives in a positive way. So super excited to be here today.
That's great. Thank you. And, like Taylor had mentioned before, 2 completely different backgrounds, but 2 great backgrounds that were needed to form this partnership. So we're going to get into that conversation now. So on February 9th, Sterling and ID.me announced their partnership. You can read more about it on both of our websites. But I want to, ask the 2 of you some questions, and I will, deeter it off to either of you. So let's start with Taylor. What do you see, as the benefits of our recently announced partnership?
There's a lot. And I think that throughout the course of this conversation, we'll hopefully be able to hit on a number of them. I guess what I would sum up is that the long-term vision of where we collectively see this going in terms of individuals being in control of their identity and their information, that's a big thing to work through, and sort of having 2 companies that are respectively best in breed representing, identity and screening services really brings together a direct path to be able to accomplish some of those objectives in a really exciting way. And, beyond a lot of the things that our clients will respond to and that we think will make some really cool new sort of in-market solutions and streamline processes and solve problems, this is also something that I'm really excited about in terms of just societal benefit and individual benefit as we move forward. So I think that we see a path with ID.me, not just short term, but really long term in ways of solving sort of old problems and things that we'll get into in more detail throughout the conversation. But that's how I'd summarize it.
Blake, what do you see as the benefits of this partnership?
Yeah, well, at ID.me, we're building the identity layer for the internet, and it's really analogous to like what Visa did for payments. So, just imagine a world where like Visa and MasterCard didn't exist, and you had to pay with cash at every merchant, right? And just but that's exactly what identity is like. Like, you have to create a new password. If you verify your identity, it's like trapped with the organization that you verified for. And with COVID and all these online services that have now migrated, to the digital channel for the first time, it's just not sustainable. It wasn't sustainable for you to create a new password at every site you visit. It certainly is not sustainable to ask you to prove who you are and like enroll into multi-factor authentication. And when you look at like a lot of employment workflows, there are often a lot of additional credentials beyond just identity verification. Like there's, eligibility to work within the United States and like E-Verify. There's, if you're a medical professional, like what are your licenses, for a particular industry? What's your criminal background? What's your driver's record? What's your drug testing results? And so for some of those more complex things, we do portable identity and identity verification really well. Sterling does the workforce credentialing part really well. And if you bring those 2 pieces of the puzzle together and say, hey, ultimately, consumer, this is all your data, right? And the 2 organizations are now empowering you to control your own data. We're going to save you time and money. And then that's what Visa does, right? Like you control whether your money moves to a merchant, and Visa sells trust and convenience. ID.me and Sterling together sell trust and convenience and also safety in many cases, so that consumers can finish transactions faster, and employers will benefit from streamlined workflows, just like Visa, streamlined a bunch of stuff for merchants as well, and ultimately save them a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think real quick, I think that's a really important point, that this is not just to the benefit of individuals or just to the benefit of organizations. These things will really collectively benefit in significant ways, both sides of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just love the point, trust, safety, but also convenience. So I think that's a great way to touch upon this partnership here. So clearly there are other organizations out in both of these industries. So I am curious as to why Sterling and ID.me specifically came together. So Taylor, what drew you to a company like ID.me?
Yeah. A few things. So one, I'd be remiss in not just saying it's a very strong cultural fit, which is important anytime you look at a partnership. How do the companies work together? And so that was certainly an important consideration for us. But where we had been on a journey and building out, we have I run a whole identity division at Sterling. We have a significant team. We have a significant focus and in global solutions. What we were working on in the United States when we met ID.me was very much in line with where they were going. They were just significantly ahead of us and really had executed very well on a vision that I felt very strongly about. And that is to say, having multiple identity solutions. There should not just be one path towards someone getting through identity, which is too often what you find. Even good identity solutions, just one does not work for everybody, right? And within our space, it's not the same. A lot of identity solutions where they have taken off is within financial services and gig and sort of these organizations that are comfortable with off ramps to say, okay, well, if I can get 80% of people or 90% of people through this, great. For us, it's 100%. We cannot, provide any candidates for employment with a path that doesn't work for them and block their ability to go through for screening. And so ID.me really represented multiple different paths, configurable, customizable. Not every organization has the same need, right? And so all of those boxes were checked in a way that I have not seen anywhere else in the market. And then also the fact that, Blake and team have now 37 million individuals who have gone through this process, and that percentage of America has voted their confidence with ID.me and has found value in that. That then automatically streamlines a process for that amount of people where they don't have to continue going through identity verification, and starts to really be a game changer with how employers and gig companies and staffing companies hire people, because you can do it more quickly, more trustworthy. And so those are some of the key things that really drew me to ID.me.
Yeah, I love that. And honestly, there's really no surprise after you listing those out why a company like Sterling was definitely, drawn into a company like ID.me. So Blake, same question to you. You and the ID.me team, what drew you guys to Sterling?
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo Taylor's comments, like super strong cultural fit. Like we view the market the same way. We also don't take ourselves too seriously. And so, they were making fun of us and each other from I think the first meetings. And I love that. Like we're a work hard, play hard type of group. But more importantly, you have the market leader in employee screening, globally. And so when you combine great people with those capabilities, that's exactly what it's all about. Because at the end of the day, we can provide the portability and the verification of your legal identity, but ultimately it's the other credentials that are really important that begin to streamline workflows, because employers don't just care about a secure login and identity verification. They also need other things like criminal background screening and your address history and all that stuff. And so when you bring the two together and to say, hey, we do identity really well, but we're never going to have county courthouse runners. You guys have all that infrastructure, built out. And if we together, we can liberate this data to flow with the consumer who is the true owner of it. That's what I'm really passionate about, that right now we're in an ecosystem where consumers are largely powerless to control their own data, aggregated in credit bureaus and data brokers. And everyone has access to it seemingly, but you. And so this is for the employment space and even for some adjacent verticals beyond it, an immensely powerful partnership to recenter the market around the consumer and the individual. And when you have two market leaders coming together with the same kind of spirit and philosophy, it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to, close out just kind of talking about our partnership at a high level that, just bringing two industry leaders together. We have a lot of the same mindset, the same cultural fits. And I truly do love that. So we did get a little bit of a shout out on LinkedIn, just saying hi. So do say hi to our panelists, Blake and Taylor. Thank you all for joining us live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube right now. And of course, obviously, thank you to Blake and Taylor for joining us. So let's move into our identity verification offering. So this is going to be an open conversation. So I have 3 questions to ask. And I just want, the two of you to kind of, bounce things off of each other. I won't name someone to go first. So if you guys have to fight for it, you have to fight for it. So the first question I want to ask is just to kind of give our audience a little knowledge around this. So when is identity typically checked?
So I'll go first from an employment standpoint. Blake, maybe you can expand from there. I mean, this is it's a big question that's at the heart of everything sort of we're doing, right? It varies upon everything. And I think, what Blake can expand on is we're just all going through this movement from analog identity to digital identity in every aspect of life, right? But from the employment standpoint, it's actually kind of shocking if you just stop and think that, I-9 was introduced, I think, in 1985, somewhere right around there. And it has largely just sort of come as the way we check identity within employment. It's after you hire someone, right? And so that has, I think, never been a great solution, never been a great way of handling this, but is particularly more so in the age of remote work and so on. But also when you stop and consider just background screening and all the downstream processes, it is just paramount that you get not only the right person, but also the right information about that person, because the entire background screen, everything is kind of predicated upon that. So within employment, of course, there are examples of employers who do a better job, but it's really on the margins. Likewise, with background screening companies, and typically identity is not checked until either really late in the process or after employment.
Yeah, and I would just echo that and say, identity usually, but not always, happens up front, because identity is the trust layer, and you often can't deliver services on top without trust. Like if we're authenticating a doctor to a healthcare app for prescriptions, the prescription app cannot function until knowing that that's like a licensed physician who's like issuing prescriptions on it. So the way I view identity is that it's really about access and security. We're a utility, and utilities work best when you don't notice it, right? Like everything's fine until your password doesn't work, and it's like, oh God, like now I've got to go through this like 5-minute reset process. And really, like the access and security part is a function of risk and your incentive. So if you're trying to like check into MGM, which is an experience that we power in Las Vegas for an hour, we enable you to skip the line, verify on your phone. But the level of verification is pretty simple. It's like your phone and or a government ID. If you want to go to like Social Security and like change your direct deposit information, replace a replacement SSN card, the vetting needs to be more rigorous. Like now you're going to go through both government ID and selfie and records validation and device tenure. And we can like fluidly configure the amount of trust according to the risk and the incentive of the user. Like what you'd be willing to do to access Social Security, you probably wouldn't be willing to do to get your room key from MGM. So it's really important to like have a solution that delivers like just the right amount of trust based on the risk of the transaction, so that the incentive of the user is aligned to it. And this all gets easier over time. Like once we verified everybody for the government will always do things to you that no other organization would. That's why the driver's license is our national ID card, because what the DMV does to you, no like commercial organization in their right mind would do and expect to have customers. But the insight for that is that when you can take these trusted digital credentials from the government back to the economy, you can really do some exciting things to improve both trust and convenience and safety for everyone else who can benefit from the strength of what government agencies make you do to prove who you are.
Yeah, and I think just to expand a little bit on that, one of the other things that is really exciting for our clients is that most organizations are very used to assessing similarly risk level, like Blake was talking about, and designing background screening packages in line with that. And most of the time, even breaking that down from a job position perspective, right? And because risk changes in all of these different scenarios, and the same thing should occur with identity. It's not necessarily one size fits all, right? There are different ways to set this up to meet those different risk levels that employers will be able to choose from.
Yeah, and I think that's a great add-on and a perfect segue into my next question. So you did bring up, background screening, a couple of times, like over the past couple of minutes. So I would, and I'm sure our audience would love to know too. So what is the benefit of identity verification to a background screening program?
Yeah, I can say simply two things. One is, you want to make sure the person you're hiring is the person you're hiring. And frankly, the person you're screening is the person that you're screening. And I think, most people's natural reaction is like, really, does that really happen that someone is, faking to be, and the answer is yes.
I don't know. Does it? I don't know.
And, I think, frankly, since we've rolled this out, we've been surprised at some of what we've seen. I mean, like legitimate fraud rings that operate for specific purposes. But even if you say, okay, that's accounting for a small percentage, of course it is. Generally within employment, this is a small percentage. You obviously still want to stop that. But where there's a much more significant vulnerability day to day, is that people can come in, and if you think about the way the background screening process works with nearly any company, you're going to be onboarded. Blake Hall comes to work, and it's he's asked to provide his name, his social security number, his date of birth, his address, etc. That information is then fed into a background screening system and the employer's respective ATS and so on. And it's essentially trusted. There are very few guardrails to say, did Blake actually give us his right name? Did he give us his date of birth? And frankly, Blake, may not have purposefully lied about. He may have just used his name. Right. Or we see a lot of cases where someone moves from Europe and transposes the digits of a date of birth. Yep. These things have significant tangible consequences with the background screen. And it's critical that they are caught right up front and verified so that everything that happens past that point, you can use and rely on the information that you have. That's how I'd best sum it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do with each organization is we just benchmark their current performance. We go like, what are your current conversion rates, per like 100 employee applicants? What's the level of security that you have? And then what are you dealing with like on the fraud side? And once you have that, you kind of just unpack the workflow. And then we go, well, here's what you'd have with ID.me. And then we'll go prove it. And that's why we literally have zero gross churn. And our net revenue retention is north of 150% because we literally create a before and after picture and say you're going to have higher conversion rates for legitimate folks. You're going to have lower rates of fraud. And by the way, we do all the help desk support too. So like all password reset or identity verification issues, we got it because that's all that we do and we do it really well. One thing I'll note is that we're now working with about 20 states that are live and then 10 more coming. So 30 states for unemployment benefits. Yeah. And that really is like a caricature of what you typically deal with in terms of access and security. You've got really desperate people on one side who need to put food on the table for themselves and for their family that we're working our tails off to get them access.
Right.
And then you also have the largest cyber attack in American history in terms of fraud. The country's likely lost now $300 billion or more, right? And we're stopping over $1 billion of fraud a week. But one of the cool things about portable identity is that if we verified who you are for unemployment benefits, then as we get vaccinated and we go back to work, we can take those verified identities back into employers. And then if we're onboarding you as Sterling, literally all we need is your consent. You have a secure login. We already know your name, date of birth, social, and we verified you, 9 ways from Sunday. And and then so we just go, hey, do we have your consent to screen your criminal background history? Do we have your consent to screen your driving record? And all we need is a yes. and then Sterling can go to work to screen and verify those credentials. And so you can already see from the consumer's perspective, they don't need to upload a lot of documentation or fill out their personal information. Literally, all they would need to do is sign into the same account they use for unemployment, give consent, and they're done. And that is way better for them. And it's way better for employers because they're going to have higher conversion rates and they're going to have higher trust and safety. And ultimately like lower cost. And that's, that's the name of the game, is like, if you save people time and money, you have a pretty good business proposition.
Yeah, that's great. And it's interesting, this conversation like overall is interesting, but the points that both of you just made. So we actually shared a document with our LinkedIn audience yesterday, and it was essentially a mock calculator of a risk of a bad hire, what it could cost your company. And of course, a lot goes into it of just maybe someone leaving and not really liking the company right away and kind of onboarding someone, things like that. But a lot of it dives into the fraud aspect. And seriously, if you do not know who you are hiring, if it does turn out bad, this is what could cost your company. So I think this conversation about bringing identity in first, bringing it during the screening process, the benefits to background screening, super, super important. And something like that is very, very eye-opening to an organization.
Hey, Caitlin, let me just say one other thing before we jump. Fraud's critically important, and that's obviously a major focus, but I also want to make sure convenience isn't lost in this, because if I'm an individual, I hate every time I have to go fill out an intense page with all of my social and my date of birth and my name and do all of this stuff. It is so much easier to just log in and source information I already trust and have verified and just say, yes, I consent to sharing this with X party. And I know exactly what I'm sharing and so on. So just convenience is also very important as a part of this, in addition to reducing fraud.
Yeah, and we're, PayPal for identity is a decent way to describe us. It's like the difference between entering all your credit card information at a merchant versus saying like, oh, I've already got a PayPal account, I've linked that card, all I've got to do is like log in and I'm done. That's the difference in terms of time saving, but amplified a lot more, because all the documents you need to upload for employment is way more significant than a credit card. So that portability becomes a much more important offering in the employment space.
Yeah, no, that's great. And listen, convenience is always a good thing. And I think our audience can agree with me on that one for sure. So I want to take this discussion and relate it to, our current environment. And the current environment I'm talking about is us working remotely, us dealing with, the COVID-19 pandemic. So my question for the two of you is, what type of impact has COVID and the rise of remote work had on identity and screening services?
Yeah, I'll speak quickly from the employment and screening side of things. Everyone has had to adjust very quickly to an entirely new landscape. I think the vast majority of employers that we saw either went and leaned fully into remote work or accommodated it as much as they possibly could. And with that has come a whole bunch of new challenges, right? I think everyone's used, even as flawed as it was in person, now it's now digital and remote, and there's entirely new challenges that go into this. So, we're hearing from employers every single day with ways that, like, I'll give you a couple examples. We have employers that now, as part of their onboarding, will ship out, a bunch of equipment to people, and they want to make sure people aren't just defrauding just to get this expensive equipment and then leaving. So there's sort of simple things that occur like that. There's also just real challenges around fulfillment of I-9 process that has to be done in person. And, a lot of the processes employers use were just antiquated and not well adjusted to the new time that we live in. And digital identity and solving for that is really a huge component. So I would say it has changed dramatically these spaces. And I think Blake can probably speak to that in even greater detail on his side.
Yeah, I think you had trends, Caitlin. You have all these services that are moving, and our economy was already digitizing, but then COVID just threw lighter fluid on that. So there's all sorts of services that had to be moved to the digital channel, which is great in many ways because it's moving our country and society forward. But at the same time, there's really serious accessibility issues because most online verification is predicated on having credit history. If you think about it, like the DMVs and the State Department passports, they are our providers of national identity, but really like no state has digitized their driver's licenses in a meaningful way. The State Department, because we don't want a federal government centralized national ID, has not centralized passports. So government is just absent as a platform for trusted and portable identity. Whereas, you do one visit to the DMV for a physical credential, and then it streamlines everything from like checking into a hotel to buying a bottle of wine. But the government's just missing. And so into the void moves the credit bureaus and the data brokers. Well, the problem with that is that what if you don't have credit history? Or what if your data is wrong? And
Right.
so, as a veteran, I come from a culture where no man left behind is a deep part, is the core of our ethos. That like we will always take care of each other. And so at IDME, we have a No Identity Left Behind initiative. And as we went down the numbers and we said, well, who's less likely to have credit history? Less affluent Americans. Well, who's more likely to be less affluent? Minority communities. Women have a higher likelihood of changing their name in our society after marriage. And so therefore are more likely to be listed inaccurately in records, right? So by virtue of being a minority or a woman, you have lower rates of online identity verification success to employment, healthcare, financial services, government, everything. And so we are the only provider in the United States right now that has a video chat capability that can virtualize an in-person interaction, literally just like us talking with your government ID, in order to expand access and inclusion, so that if your data is missing from records or wrong in records, you still have a pathway to prove who you are. And there have been just incredibly emotional moments, literally, where there's an 81-year-old veteran in Japan whose wife has Alzheimer's. He lives overseas, so wasn't able to like prove who he was, and didn't have physical access to a VA facility. And like our team was like really moved to the point of like tears when this person, like because of this capability, was able to verify and access the benefits he'd earned through service to his country for the first time. And now in unemployment, where there's literally like families that would be out on the street and homeless, people contemplating suicide without being able to get access to their benefits that we're able to get through online because of this capability. It is really, really important that we level the playing field for access. And then once we've tied you to the login, now your data can move. And I think for far too long, we relied on in-person verification without understanding the burden it puts on certain communities. And like, if you're on unemployment benefits, you might be getting food stamps, from Department of Agriculture, or you might be on Medicare or Medicaid from CMS. And if you're missing or wrong in credit bureaus, it means you have to do like basically an in-person DMV equivalent visit to each one of those agencies and waste hours of your life. And it was just high time that changes. So that aspect of having an inclusive and online service is really something that we've helped advance. And now I know there's a few other vendors that are trying to spin up video chat, and good, because the country needed to have a more inclusive approach to online verification than just credit records.
Yeah, so I truly do appreciate, those real life examples that you've shared with us and our audience. A lot to, these shows that I do week after week, I really do try to pull out the human aspect, because if you look at two of our companies, we are very human, centric. We are going and getting these stories and really taking that approach to things. So I really do appreciate you sharing those stories. So I want to talk a little bit about the future, and that gets me excited about this partnership. And I know you guys are going to be thrilled to talk about it, and our audience is definitely going to be excited about what you have to say. So we are talking about the future of our partnership. So this is an open conversation for the two of you. So it's a two-part question. So the question is, to start, what is the future of our partnership? And if you guys can you provide our audience with a little glimpse of what is to come from it? So I'll leave this open. Maybe, Blake, you can start, because I think Taylor took the first couple other ones. So,
I mean, there's almost like no limit to what we can't do together, starting with like I-9 verification from upfront and just identity verification to make sure you're screening the right person. I mean, those are the two initial use cases. Then you go to like the sharing economy, where oftentimes like the credentials required to drive for like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and TaskRabbit and Instacart, they're exactly the same. But right now, the supplier has to do it multiple times. So if we just make the data move with the user, you can really reduce a lot of the acquisition cost and the screening cost for those apps. And those costs are really important components and inputs to their business model. And then, on the COVID test and vaccination results side, we have more scale than any other digital wallet out there by far. Your COVID test results, and then increasingly your COVID vaccination status to the digital wallet, that can also help employers safely reopen offices and understand which segment of my workforce has been vaccinated, which has been tested or might need to be tested on site, who's gone through and answered the questions, so that they understand what access rights they want to grant based on somebody's COVID test results. And certainly with Sterling's position in the employer market, that's super exciting, because that's probably the logical first place you get screened. And then if we can make those results, portable out to concert venues and casinos and airlines and things like that, it gets really exciting.
Yeah, and I want us to come back to the COVID piece, because I do think that's a unique sort of interesting discussion in of itself. But when we look at the future, I think Blake's right. I mean, there's no limit here. But beyond, our initial focus is really on solving for the identity verification part of employment. And we're going to lean into that and help all of our clients and employers kind of understand how that will work. But right around that corner is really taking and leaning into the portability of this and the digital wallet component, right? So as I often talk about, once you can confirm someone is who they say they are, and you can make that portable, you can start tying immutable data to that person and put that person in control of their information. And then that benefits everybody, right? Like, why does information that doesn't change have to continually be re-verified? Because there hasn't been a better system that's been put in place to solve for that, right? And so me as the individual, I have a lot of benefit in having control of my information and sort of owning that. But then from an employment standpoint, how fantastic to be able to screen me in a way where at least a good percentage of things can be streamlined right up front. And I can choose, okay, I'm going to share my identity. I'm going to share my verified college degree. I'm going to share my work history. I'm going to share my references. And you get it right like that, right? And then you just catch up the things that are dynamic, the criminal history, et cetera. The amount that a solution like that can change just fundamentally how we operate within the gig economy and traditional employment is really staggering. And then, I think I-9 is obviously something that comes up a lot. And, there is still, as we speak, the requirement of having an in-person component of this. But if you really just take on the surface of the way ID.me's solution works and the NIST 863 level of compliance with part of their solution, there is really no reason that as we move forward long term, we can't leverage this in a really exciting way that can further streamline a really complicated and frustrating part of our process right now. So that's how I really view as we move forward. And then I think the other thing I'd add is that, from an employer standpoint, this isn't also just about background screening. Once somebody comes in and they have all this information verified, there's no reason that can't then be leveraged for payroll and benefits and all the other downstream applications that go beyond that for further streamlining and trust and safety.
Yeah, well, that sounds perfect to me, and it sounds really good to our audience too. We do have a shout out from one of our clients on LinkedIn, one of Sterling's clients saying, this is just a big monumental step for the company. So again, this is a monumental step for both Sterling and ID.me, and I'm very excited to be talking about it here today with Blake and Taylor. Just a quick reminder too, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, if you do have questions for these two, please go ahead and send them in the comment area. You can go ahead and ask questions. So I do want to touch back on two things that were brought up in the previous discussion. So Blake, real quickly for our audience, can you just define what a digital wallet is?
Sure. A digital wallet is just a container that can hold credentials, right? So there's two components to signing up for ID.me. There's the login, which typically starts with password, and then you can protect it from takeover by adding a phone number or a native app with a code generator, or even a FIDO security key if you really want to go nuts. And so now we know it's the same user who's coming back over time. That account's protected from takeover. Once we know the same person's returning over time, we can begin to add verified credentials to that account. So again, legal identity, and you've got the MGM use case, you've got the NIST use case, which we're doing with federal agencies and workforce benefits. Now that once we know who you are, especially if we verified you at a government agency, to Taylor's point, it becomes really easy to bind additional credentials. So one way that this already works is in healthcare, we've credentialed already over 10% of America's providers that have prescription authority. And so I would fail that check. I'm Blake Hall, but I'm not a credentialed medical professional. My wife, Suzelle, is. So if maybe she verified at Social Security and we know who she is, she then goes over to like Allscripts or to Doctor First or one of the prescription apps. The same exact login that she used at Social Security is what's used over there. But then we as the wallet go, great, we know who you are, but we also need your medical credentials. Can you please input your DA number, your NPI number, your federation, your state licensing number in like Maryland. And then we can do a series of API calls out to the state medical board, to the DEA, to Health and Human Services, and say, A, are these identifiers valid? And B, whose identity do they correspond to? And if it all comes back Suzelle Hall, then we go, great. So now we can bind the medical credentials of my wife to her legal identity. And we can tell the prescription application, this is Suzelle Hall, here's her DEA number, here's her NPI number, here's her state medical license, which is in good standing and has not been suspended or revoked. She's in a DEA certified state, and we've been audited against the DEA standards as well. And if she wants to prescribe narcotics and controlled substances, have at it. And then we don't actually see what she, the scripts she writes. That's between her and the app and the patient and so on. You're the trust layer that enables access to the app. And so now within this digital wallet, she basically has the digital equivalent of her driver's license along with all of her medical credentials. And then if she were to do something with Sterling and bind educational credentials, or maybe, her criminal background screening, depending on the workflow of what she wants access to, it helps her more easily prove the things about her identity that she needs to prove to complete a transaction.
And I'll give you, a use case that I think is particularly front of mind for me as we look to start to move forward with digital wallet. I know we'll talk about COVID in a bit, but if you think about volunteers, think about poor volunteers that are doing goodwill, that are volunteering. They essentially have to jump through hoops at every volunteering organization they go through to complete whatever screening happens, data collection, verification, etc. And I've worked a lot with Katie Zwetzig, who leads our Sterling Volunteers division. There's practices that have been in place to try to accommodate sharing of criminal history results and attempts to kind of streamline this, right? But imagine a system where I, as a volunteer, can just move from one organization to the next and simply through a federated login be able to share this information from trusted, verified sources. It can really change the entire way volunteering works as well. So there's, beyond employment, there's other important use cases where digital wallet and identity really come into play.
Yeah, I love that use case, especially right now, just like given everything, giving back is top of mind, volunteering is top of mind. So can we make it easier for people to go from organization to organization? And yes, it seems like we can. So we do want to touch back on, again, COVID testing and, vaccination. So my question for the two of you is, how can our partnership enable digital proof of COVID testing and someone's vaccine status?
I think there's a few things that are kind of all happening at once because, now you have vaccinated people, you got tested people, you've got folks who are neither, that you might need to screen. And so the table stakes is just the CDC health questionnaire about symptoms and everything else. And just understanding like how we manage it today, it's very paper driven and things like that. So we said, hey, we need to eat our own dog food and just have a solution that digitizes this, where HR can kind of see if you're coming on site, table stakes, fill out, the questionnaire about symptoms, then you have an audit trail of that. And then let the person have it in a portable way. Because if like a sports team or whoever else is also going to require it, then if you take the event that the employer requires and it's like an employee benefit at that point. Like, why have to re-verify on a separate app? Just like let them take it with them. And then increasingly, like, you know, there are some pretty major test providers that are out there, and like by grabbing the APIs, you can begin to bind like this person's been tested on site or this person's been tested at home, and the date timestamp. And then I think like some airlines were saying, as long as you've been tested within 72 hours, it's fine. But, you know, as long as we can say this is when you were tested, each organization can make the right access control determination about whether that's close enough to the time that they're letting you in for in-person access. And then finally, you know, the vaccination stuff, we have a unique advantage in that a lot of the data is in state immunization registries and with the government, and the government looks to these NIST 863 standards, increasingly like electronic healthcare record platforms are as well. And we already, you know, are in the loop for like, you know, VA healthcare data and things like that at a federal agency where we can move healthcare data from a government agency to a third-party application. And so it's a little bit Frankenstein, because like people are getting, you know, vaccinated in rural areas by their dentist, and then like, you know, in mass centers like the Javits Center, and they're also getting, you know, shots at maybe more traditional locations like CVS and Walgreens. But in terms of being able to aggregate that data, and with the individual's consent to bind it back, we have unique capabilities in terms of verifying who you are. And then through that attribute exchange that I already mentioned with like medical credentials and everything else, that's basically what our platform was built to do, like to grab a state immunization registry or access to a pharmacy, bind the two together, and then to populate vaccine credentials. And that can be really beneficial for employers who can save a ton of money on testing, and also reopen the office to folks once they know that they've been vaccinated.
Yeah, and we've, you know, as you know, Caitlin, I mean, we've released a COVID testing solution and been really leading on the employment and screening side and allowing employers to test employees and facilitate as best as possible return to office scenarios. And so we've had a lot of discussions around the incorporation of vaccination data and really, just to Blake's point, digitizing this process so that it's not only easier for employers, but also for individuals, and then for other use cases relative to travel and entertainment and so on. And, you know, it's Blake's absolutely right. It's a little bit of a Frankenstein. This is a new problem that a number of people are trying hard to solve. And I think I'd netted out that Sterling and ID.me are positioned very effectively to be able to navigate the complications of this and deliver a solution that will work really well for all associated use cases, from individuals to employers and beyond that.
Yeah, so I think that's a great, comment there of, we are positioned well to navigate some of this uncertainty right now and some of the challenges people are facing. It's a great comment because we did just get a comment on LinkedIn that I absolutely love. It says, I am positive with Sterling's leading position in background screening and identity management, and the identity management expertise of ID.me. This partnership will reshape various product offerings to make the world a safer place. So I love that comment, and I think it's truly a testament to this partnership for sure, and everything that the two of you have shared today. I think we have time for one more question from me, but again, our audience, please, send in questions if you have any. So how can identity verification and workforce credentials streamline onboarding for certain segments of the workforce? So it's a question for the two of you, so have at it.
Yeah, I think Blake gave some great examples earlier, using his wife as a case. And I think, Blake tells a story of her uploading forms and jumping through all these hoops. He's got a number of these, I think we all do. And just even thinking in your own life, like I think everybody who's listening to this has an example of filling out arduous forms and sort of proving things about themselves and jumping through hoops for employment. And then you have the employers that are facilitating that and requiring these processes because they have to. And so I think there is just no end to the ability to streamline these things. And Sterling, we're a verticalized organization. And so we have specific focuses in, healthcare and retail and staffing and gig and so on. And of course it varies in these instances. But if you think about, staffing agencies who are hiring, and being able to really provide a standardized, streamlined way of proving identity and certain aspects about somebody, gig workers who are often working for multiple different companies and going through very similar processes. There's a tremendous amount of potential there. Even to sort of what I would look at as kind of physical access or contractor management. Think of these large, I was literally just on a call this morning with a very large company that has a significant contractor population where they have to go through specific background screening. When the person comes in, there's a lengthy check-in process. And, imagine if in the future that contractor can walk in, scan a QR code and say, okay, we know this is Blake Hall. We know he's been checked for X, Y, and Z. And we can, he's approved to be let in. It's that type of thing that I think will be really revolutionary within this space.
Yeah, and I think I was the first person in my family to go just be an officer in the military. Like everyone else was enlisted, and like the blue collar folks in this country are really like the closest to my heart because those are my roots. That's where I come from. And when I think of scenarios like, somebody working 2 or 3 jobs, or maybe, they're like a cashier at a 7-Eleven and they're also working at a hotel, it means that they're going through I-9 twice. Well, if you go through I-9 twice, not only is it annoying, it means you have all these sensitive like government documents that you're transporting around, and therefore makes you a higher risk for identity theft. In addition to putting burden on it. And so if you can just like make the data move with the user and go like, oh, we just did this I-9 check for this hotel chain, like, yeah, 7-Eleven, like it's all good. Like we can just release it, on demand. That's great. I think about use cases like teachers, right? That, summertime is kind of an area of opportunity. And maybe if they want to contribute as a supplier in the sharing economy, again, if you'd screen them and done an I-9 check for their school, it'd be very cool if you could just move that over to the gig economy space, and there's a lot of veterans as well who participate, that's like part of where I come from. And back to the doctor thing, I did watch my wife take her degrees and diplomas, out of the frame into a grocery bag to take to get hospital privileges, which is insane. I'm like, if only there was a company that your husband ran that could do a real time.
If only, thank goodness you did that.
I mean, these are doctors, like their time is so valuable. They try to see 30 patients a day in 15-minute increments, and we're making them go through this like 1950s process. Now, we've done a lot to like help credential them for electronic prescription, but it'd be great to just get it on the front end, that when they first come in and go through screening and credentialing check and like all the stuff that Sterling is doing, or if you're locum tenens and you're in a rural area where they need to import doctors and credential them rapidly, once we know who you are, and if we can help you prescribe to the DEA standards, and if we can do an API call that in 300 milliseconds with Sterling confirms your educational credentials, we confirm your DEA, your NPI, your license number against the state medical board, then you literally all the actions I saw her taking with her DEA number and her educational degrees, we can just automate with her consent. And it would be transformational because physician burnout is a real problem in this country as well. But yeah, I mean, if we can you will literally make people's lives better, because these tasks of proving who you are and gathering all this documentation, it sucks and it's expensive for employers, and it reduces access to employment. And so I'm just super pumped about kind of, greasing the skids, so to speak, to make the market work more efficiently.
Yeah, and I'm excited that, both of our companies can work together and, deliver on that for sure. So we have had such a tremendous conversation today, and I know I've learned a lot. I am very excited, as probably our audience is right now. So just one quick final call across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you are watching live right now, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the comments box. But I do want to gather some final thoughts from the two of you as we wrap up today's episode. So Taylor, I'll bring it over to you first. Can you deliver any final thoughts to our audience today?
No, Caitlin, thank you. It's been a great conversation. Really appreciate you having us on today. I think all I'd say is I'm tremendously excited for all the reasons we've discussed today, and I'd encourage the audience and all of our respective clients to stay tuned. We'll be working with all of you and keeping both our clients and just the market up to date on all the things that we're working on. I think that, we're introducing some things here soon within the next month or two, but then it's just going to be kind of continued development from there as we work to bring to market all of the exciting things we've talked about. So we're excited. Blake, thank you as well for joining for the partnership.
No, that's perfect. Blake, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, hard to imagine a world without Visa and MasterCard where you wouldn't have a portable credential for payments. Why don't you have portable credentials to prove who you are and for employment? It's common sense. And like, you don't realize it now, but if you just think about what a payments world would be if you still had to pay in cash, like that's how broken the current status quo is. And we're just pumped to be able to work with Sterling to move us, into the 22nd century here. So.
That's great. What an energizing conversation to start. Well, I mean, I think the three of us start our day off. I know some other people are watching in other time zones, but still giving you that extra, a little bit of excitement here. But thank you both for joining me today. Sterling and ID.me is truly a game-changing partnership, and I'm thrilled to deliver this message today and to keep delivering messages and more information to all of you as you listen live to us each week, but also on demand and across our social media platforms, across our websites, everything like that. But thank you, as always, for joining us live on Sterling Live. And Blake and Taylor, thank you so much again for joining us. And we hope that we can catch you all next time. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.